Europe is stepping up efforts to devise a peace plan for Ukraine following that tense exchange between President Trump and President Zelensky. The meeting over the weekend began well but quickly spiralled as the Vice President J.D. Vance first criticised Zelensky for disrespecting the United States. It then fast turned into this.
We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that.
That's exactly what you're doing.
You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influenced.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influenced.
You're right now not in a very good position.
From that, in Washington and essentially being kicked out of the White House, President Zelensky then travelled to London, where the British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, gathered nearly 20 allies, highlighting the need to form a coalition that can support Ukraine's defence against Russian aggression. Discussions include the possibility of deploying military assets on the ground with a focus on securing commitments from additional countries. Starmer explained the importance of a unified approach and reassured the US remains a reliable ally despite recent tensions.
But to support peace in our continent and to succeed, this effort must have strong US backing. We're working with the US on this point after my meeting with President Trump last week. And let me be clear, we agree with the President on the urgent need for a durable peace. Now we need to deliver together. Finally, we agreed that leaders will meet again very soon to keep the pace behind these actions and to keep working towards this shared plan. We are at a crossroads in history today. This is not a moment for more talk. It's time to act, time to step up and lead, and to unite around a new plan for a just and enduring peace.
As European nations increase their military support, the world is watching to see how they will navigate their commitments to Ukraine amid the shifting dynamics in Washington. The Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who of course has his own issues with President Trump, was asked what he thought of the tense exchange over the weekend.
Russia continues to try to fight to claim more land in Ukraine, and we could see an end to this war tomorrow if Russia decided to stop its illegal invasion of Ukraine. On Friday in the Oval Office, President Zelensky pointed out, in so many words, that Vladimir Putin is a liar and a criminal and cannot be trusted to keep his word in any way, shape, or form, because he has demonstrated time and time again that he will break any agreements. I stand with Vladimir Zelensky, and I stand with the people of Ukraine.
All right, let's get some analysis now. We're joined by a man who does have all the cards, Professor Tim Harcourt, Chief Economist at the Institute of Public Policy at UTS, the host of the Airport Economist channel right here on Ticker. Good to see you.
Yeah, good morning. A lot happening, Aaron, over the weekend, certainly in Washington. And
I've been dying to talk to you because I can't wait to find out what you think. Let's start off with that tense exchange in the Oval Office. What were your first thoughts when you watched it?
Yeah, I was a bit surprised because normally you expect that sort of argy-bargy to happen behind closed doors, and then you have smiles for the cameras typically, but you saw it in front of the world media. And also the strong intervention by Vice President J.D. Vance. You're not really used to having the Vice President and President ganging up on a world leader like that. So it was just a bit surprising, even though you can understand the fundamentals at play where probably Trump is wanting to bring the Europeans and the UK into helping with Ukraine's defence. And President Zelensky is warning the White House that, a little bit like Neville Chamberlain trying to appease Hitler over Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia, if you give a little bit to Putin, he'll take more. So it was interesting, the actual dynamics, despite the rather outrageous sort of behaviour in the White House.
It was incredible to watch, and it did. I completely agree with you. You thought, why did this not happen behind closed doors? There seemed to be a lot of pent-up frustration, and over the previous weeks, we had seen President Trump refer to Zelensky as a dictator. He tried to wind that back during his meeting on Friday with Sir Keir Starmer, where he said, I don't know what you're talking about, did I really say that? But it felt like this was the exchange that kind of had to happen to get it out of both of their systems. Where do you think it goes from here? Do you see the US, I mean, this feels like a kind of World War II situation where the US is saying it's up to Europe to sort out its problems. We don't want to know about it, but we all know that the US will eventually have to get involved at some point. Do you think that this is something that they can work on, or has Zelensky done the right thing to get the support of European leaders who then essentially go to Trump on his behalf and say, here's a plan we think works? Will Trump react well to that, or does it need to be Trump's plan?
Yeah, remarkably, I mean, I've been reading a book about Winston Churchill dealing with FDR in the US and Stalin in World War II. That, you know, just brings back all those memories with dealing between, you know, the US and the UK. What's interesting is they're saying in Britain that Keir Starmer's gone through a bit of a Falklands moment. You remember that Margaret Thatcher, when she was Prime Minister, she was doing very badly because of the recession. And then she had the Falklands that sort of raised her popularity. And it seems that Starmer is taking this, you know, leading role in trying to broker some sort of peace with Ukraine, using the US and the EU together as sort of, you know, Britain playing the lead role. So that's quite interesting. And secondly, you know, maybe it's intended, maybe it's unintended, but the unintended, you know, consequences of Donald Trump has meant that people have woken up in Europe that we do actually have to take responsibility for the defence of Europe and the defence of Ukraine and NATO. And I think even people who don't like the behaviour of Donald Trump and JD Vance do agree that you know, he has got a point that the US doesn't have to pay for everything all the time. And perhaps an unintended consequence is now that Europe will really step up, and we've seen a lot of leadership from the Finnish president, from some of the Baltic countries, you know, all taking responsibility away from just relying on the US alone.
Well, that is, I mean, there is one kind of point, and that many say that when Europe finds itself in trouble, it calls up an English-speaking country and says, get us out of this mess. Historically, we know George Washington said to John Adams, stay away from the Europeans, they'll never sort it out. You speak about NATO spending. Have a look at this chart. That says what the countries of Europe are spending their money on, and that one on the right, the big blue one, nearly 3/4 is the United States of America, that spends 70% of the NATO budget comes from the United States. You don't forget, all of the beautiful speeches we're hearing from all of these world leaders are lovely, but they're very heavily reliant on the US. And if you think of the military assets that have been given to Kyiv to stave off a Ukrainian invasion, it's the US assets that are the ones that are the high tech that are doing the job. The Europeans, they've been reluctant, and as many have said, the Europeans have not given Ukraine what they need to win the war. They've given Ukraine what they need to keep the war going. Despite the platitudes, France has only given about $8 billion, whereas the US has given about $175 billion to Ukraine. And while we hear from Emmanuel Macron, and we hear from the German Chancellor, and we hear from Keir Starmer, the US is simply saying, this is your war. We are part of NATO. We don't have to be part of NATO. We don't have a gripe here. It's you guys. What are your views on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, Winston Churchill had this great phrase, you know, the union of the English-speaking peoples for that reason, was always, as the British Prime Minister in a declining empire, trying to navigate between Europe and the US and Russia, and that's sort of happening again with Keir Starmer. Look, it is true. I mean, Europe's said all the right things about Ukraine, but has never put the money in or never given the right military assistance to Ukraine. That's really been the US, and I think this is why you know, there's a concern that Trump's talking about. If Ukraine joined NATO, then of course the US as a NATO member would be forced to defend Ukraine. So I think what they're trying to do is get the Europeans in stronger in terms of financial and military backing, so they're sharing some of the burden of supporting Ukraine against Russia. And there is a view that Trump is motivated to sort of settle Russia and Ukraine, so you can isolate Iran and China into the global game. But to what extent can you have Ukraine pay the price for that, given that they've been invaded by an aggressive neighbour? And if you allow that to happen, what else could Putin do? That's the big question.
When I watched President Zelensky and the way he reacted to what JD Vance was saying, and we saw JD Vance being brought in during the meeting with Keir Starmer as well a day before, where the reporters asked the president about JD Vance's speech in Munich, which was all about free speech hitting out at Europe. You and I have spoken about it as well. And the president said, well, we've got the vice president right here. What do you think? And JD Vance essentially stood up for the US perspective of those concerns about free speech, particularly in the UK, as the British Prime Minister's there. And what I loved is that Keir Starmer didn't fight him. He turned around and said, here's an invitation from the King. Read it out, Mr. President. You're off to Windsor Castle. This is for you. Fareed Zakaria, he hosts a great show called GPS on CNN, I know you're aware of. He was speaking on a late night program straight after what happened with Zelensky and Trump on Friday night. I want to play you this because this is one take of how to deal with Donald Trump.
In a strange way, I do feel like Zelensky should have studied this a little bit more. He's an emotional guy. I've met him many times. He's very brave. He's been fighting a war, and he let his emotion get the best of him. The way to have gone in there is first you begin by saying, President Trump, you are a genius. You have completely transformed the landscape. I have with me the order of highest merit. Ukraine has never created a civilian honor this big for you. Have a big medal, put it on him, right? And then say to him, I look forward to welcoming you in Ukraine so that we can build the tallest Trump Tower in the world. That would have saved Ukraine's ass.
Now, I just love that, Tim, and I see that is how you handle a Donald Trump, because it is about Trump, and Trump is now essentially the administration of the United States is one man. What do you make of that, and what do you make of how President Zelensky has handled him? Because many have criticised Zelensky for how much money he's been able to get out of the United States without any perceived end to the war. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I like Fareed too, as you know, Aaron. That was interesting to see him in a different context.
Yes,
I think it's right. Trump's mother was Scottish, and Trump loves royalty. There's a lot of clips of Trump going through his photo album when he was president the first time and showing pictures of him with the Queen Elizabeth, the late Queen, and saying what a great relationship they had. So I mean, Trump loves the royalty sort of factor. Zelensky, look, he's a brave president, and he's been fighting it all, pretty much on his own when he could have fled, could have done lots of things. So he's really toughed it out, unlike the Assads in Syria and whoever. But what's interesting is I wonder to what extent he not only had to think about his and how to Trump taught it to the American political environment. Because the surprising thing to me, Aaron, is that I grew up with thinking that the left, the Democrats, were the peace party, the anti-war party, and always wanting to have peace in Vietnam. And now all I read about is the Republicans wanting peace in Ukraine, and they're sort of the anti-war. We don't want American troops off fighting foreign wars again.
You make a fabulous point there. It's something I want to jump in on if I can, because you're right. You think about those dreadful years after 9/11, where for whatever reason, the United States and the coalition of the willing, which included Tony Blair, who up until that point seemed to have great judgment, John Howard as well, the Australian Prime Minister, and under the push of the very strong vice president, as we know at the time, and through President Bush as well, that it was a really dark period where wars were happening, where companies like Halliburton were making so much money out of the wars. Then in comes Trump, who's very much an isolationist president, saying don't want any involvement whatsoever. It isn't good for the economy and therefore not good for business. And these people behind the scenes, and this goes to that deep state point that Trump talks about, then say, well, who's willing to listen to us? And it seems that President Biden fell for it. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's something going on between the Biden family and Zelensky that the Republicans, the MAGA Republicans, have got to be in their bonnet about, whether it's to do with Hunter Biden's laptop or whatever. There's some sort of insinuation of political interference. I mean, Vance said, he was in, he's helping the campaign in Pennsylvania and whatever. So there's something going on there. And I think, Fred's very good, and his point about, Zelensky should have just offered to give him a great order of Ukraine and build a tower. I don't think that's right, because I think for some reason the MAGA Republican grassroots don't like the Ukraine and don't like Zelensky, and they seem to be a lot more tolerant of Russia that's run by a Cold War dictator. So I wondered to what extent that wouldn't have worked. But keeping the squabbles behind closed doors might have. And in some ways, I mean, Zelensky can point out that, how strong is Russia? I mean, they've lost Syria. They couldn't keep Assad. Turkey doesn't like them. They're reliant on China. To what extent is
big picture, right? You and I talk big picture. You and I talk big picture, right? So one of the concerns that I think MAGA has is that the ongoing Ukraine war has pushed Russia closer to China, much closer. As you say, they're now reliant on it, and we keep seeing even the Xi Jinping, the Chinese premier, continually saying that they are very close and they stand with them. It's also pushed Russia closer to another nuclear power, being, of course, North Korea. And we have been told, Tony Abbott, the Australian Prime Minister, former PM, over the weekend did a YouTube interview where he said he believes that Iran's nuclear program is just months away, not years away, months away from having the weapon. Now, also a Russian ally. If you think big picture about what's happening here and and we've got Chinese warships off the coast of Australia, this is the moment, surely, to stop an aggression of what would be World War III. We have to agree that there's something in there. We don't know what it is, but clearly Donald Trump suspects that we are on the verge of World War III. Zelensky becomes yesterday's man unless he's able to get out of the way. He wants security guarantees, and I think that anyone who's watched what happened in Ukraine, the fact that it was President Clinton who told him, get rid of your weapons, Ukraine, and we'll give you security guarantees, and here's poor old Zelensky asking for them. Trump isn't saying we'll give you security guarantees because he knows that that will cause a problem with President Putin in Russia. What he is saying is sign this multi-billion-dollar, potentially trillion-dollar minerals deal, and we will protect that. And therefore your protection comes from the United States protecting its assets because we're making $1 trillion, which after all is what a Navy is meant to be about, what the military is meant to be about, right? Protecting your assets abroad as ships go through straits where there are pirates, you need a Navy, etc. Do you think that Zelensky is just looking short-term at the short-term needs, whereas essentially President Trump is looking long-term to say, I don't like the direction the game is going, something has to give and it has to stop right now?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, Trump's concerned about Iran. He's concerned about China, North Korea to some extent. And in some ways, the play with Putin is all about that. But you're right, too, in the sense that it is about protecting assets. So we think it's crazy that Trump's talking about Greenland. But of course, there are critical minerals in the Arctic that China and Russia have been after for a long time. So if you see it through the lens of sort of superpower realignment and taking into play China and Russia and Iran, see where you can see where it's going. It's just a question of, do you push back with Russia to support Ukraine? Will that help you by strength? Or if you do a deal and instead of having Ukraine join NATO, say we'll guarantee the critical assets there, therefore we'll guarantee your security together with Europe. is that a better solution for Ukraine ultimately? And it's a question of, Zelensky, what he's saying is that it's like giving up Sudetenland. You'll just allow Putin to keep going. Or you see it more through a Stalin thing where you want a Stalinist sort of lens where he's just trying to sort of protect Greater Russia and no more. That's the sort of judgment call.